It's funny how you never notice the moment your life starts to fall apart. It doesn't arrive with thunder or warning, just small cracks that spread quietly until the whole thing caves in. For me, it started in the conference room on the 24th floor of Caldwell Innovations. I'd spent 5 years there, late nights, skipped meals ideas, scribbled on napkins that turned into million-dollar projects. I used to believe I belonged. That day, I realized belonging had an expiration date. "Let's cut to it," my father said, pacing at the head of the table. "This department has lost efficiency. We need a change." I sat across from him, laptop open, presentation ready. My heart hammered, but I smiled, professional and steady. "I have a solution," I said, pointing to the screen. "If we integrate ethical data transparency, users will ethical transparency," he interrupted. Eyebrows raised. "Natalie, this isn't a philosophy seminar. This is business." "It's both," I said, keeping my tone calm. "If people don't trust how we use their data, they'll walk. You can't buy trust." Dylan laughed under his breath. "Or we could just stop giving away trade secrets to customers who don't understand them." My jaw tightened. "Transparency isn't giving away secrets, Dylan. It's showing integrity." Dad slammed his hand on the table. "Enough. You're not here to moralize. You're here to deliver results." "And I shot back. Project Mira increased engagement 30% last quarter. My project." He turned to Dylan. "Your brother led that rollout." My stomach twisted. "You mean the rollout I created, tested, and wrote the algorithms for? Watch your tone," he snapped. "This is a team, not a solo act." The word team felt manufactured and cold. At that moment, I understood the truth. My last name wasn't armor, it was a leash. By the end of the week, my access to company files was restricted. HR called me in for a quick meeting. The woman behind the desk looked uncomfortable, sliding a folder toward me like it was radioactive. "Your position has been eliminated," she said softly. "Eliminated," I repeated. "Not transferred." She shook her head. "The board made its decision." I didn't cry. Not there. I walked out through the glass lobby, past the Caldwell Innovations logo I'd helped design, past the employees, pretending not to stare. Outside, Seattle was gray and drizzling. The city lights blurred through my tears, and I realized I hadn't even taken my parking pass. When I reached my car, I sat for a long time staring at my hands. They didn't look any different, but something invisible had changed, something fundamental. I wasn't an employee anymore. I wasn't even a daughter. I was an outsider. That night, Dylan called. Not to comfort me, just to twist the knife. "You could have played it smarter, Nat," he said. "Dad gave you a chance, but you had to push your ideas. You don't win by challenging him. You win by obedience, right? By strategy," he said. "You don't walk into a lion's den waving a red flag. Then maybe the lion shouldn't eat its own." I hung up before he could reply. For weeks, I lived off severance pay and freelance gigs that barely covered rent. Recruiters stopped returning my emails once they realized my last name. Nobody wanted to hire the disgraced daughter of Caldwell Innovations. One afternoon, I ran into an old coworker at a coffee shop. He smiled awkwardly. "Heard you're taking time off." Something like that. He hesitated. "For what it's worth, everyone knew you were right about the transparency model. The board just, well, your dad didn't like being challenged." "Yeah," I said, stirring my coffee. "That's kind of his thing." When he left, I sat there for an hour, staring out the window as rain streaked down the glass. Somewhere inside, I decided I'd never beg to be let back in. But determination doesn't silence doubt. There were nights when my confidence cracked. I'd wake up at 2 in the morning replaying his words, "You're not here to moralize. You're here to deliver results." Maybe he was right. Maybe I'd been naive, thinking integrity could survive in business. Still, something in me refused to surrender. I started working again, small freelance AI audits for local startups. Nothing glamorous, but it paid enough to keep me afloat. One client, a small fintech firm, rejected my invoice after I finished the project. "We can't afford to pay right now," they said. "Exposure should be enough." Exposure. That word burned. the same word Dad had used once when talking about interns. Exposure builds character, he'd said. That night I walked down to the waterfront, the city's reflection trembling on the black water. The air smelled of salt and diesel, and I whispered to myself, "You are not done." By winter, I was down to my last $1,000. My apartment leaked whenever it rained, but my mind wouldn't stop working. I filled notebooks with sketches, diagrams, algorithms, blueprints for a new kind of AI, one that couldn't be manipulated by greed or power. One that didn't serve the system, it served the people inside it. I called it Lumos Light in the Dark. It was just an idea, fragile and uncertain, but it was mine. One evening, while searching for mentorship opportunities, I found a listing for a local hackathon. The prize was small, $10,000 and an investor introduction, but it felt like oxygen. I stayed up 3 nights coding the prototype. When I finally presented it, my voice shook, but my logic didn't. Afterward, a man with messy hair and tired eyes approached me. "I'm Eli Turner," he said. "Your pitch, Lumos? It's different. You're not selling control. You're selling clarity." "That's the point," I said. He smiled. "I want in." I didn't know then that Eli would become my partner, my ally. Maybe the only person who ever saw Lumos not as a product, but as a promise. We started meeting in cafes, trading ideas, building code, dreaming bigger than our budget allowed. Still, every time I thought of Dad, I remembered that conference room the way his voice cut through mine. He thought he'd ended my career that day. He didn't realize he'd started my revolution. By spring, the name Caldwell had become a whisper behind me. But sometimes late at night when my computer hummed and the world was silent, I'd look at the Lumos logo glowing on my screen and think, this is what falling looks like. Not collapse. Transformation. My father cleared his throat the way he always did before saying something cruel he'd later call honest. The clinking of silverware froze midair. Mom's hand hovered over the wine bottle. "Natalie," he said, his voice steady, almost rehearsed. "We're not your bank anymore. You're on your own." The sentence hit harder than I expected, though. Maybe I should have seen it coming. He said it so casually, like he was reading the weather report, not cutting me off from the life I'd known since birth. Across the table, my brother Dylan smirked into his glass of Merlot. Mom didn't say a word. She just looked down at her plate of roasted chicken, her gaze fixed intently on the parsley garnish, deliberately avoiding all eye contact. Outside, the Seattle rain beat against the dining room windows, a soft rhythm that almost masked the sound of my world splitting open. "Excuse me?" I said finally, forcing my voice not to shake. Dad leaned back in his chair, folding his napkin with surgical precision. "You heard me. You're 30. You've been coasting long enough. Caldwell Innovations isn't a charity, and I'm not here to fund your, what is it this month, freelance coding a project. It's not a project," I said. "It's a platform. An AI tool for—" He cut me off with a flick of his hand. "You can pitch that to your investors." "Oh, wait." He smiled thinly. "You don't have any." The silence afterward was suffocating. Even the grandfather clock in the corner seemed to pause between ticks. Dylan leaned forward, that same smug grin I'd hated since we were kids. "Nat, don't take it so hard. Dad's just trying to help you wake up. Maybe if you'd stayed at the company instead of playing mad scientist, you'd have a salary instead of a sob story." My jaw tightened. "You mean the company where you take credit for everyone else's work?" He shrugged the way people do when the truth doesn't matter to them. Dad's gaze cut between us. "Enough. You made your choice, Natalie. You walked out. Don't come running back when it doesn't work out." Mom shifted uncomfortably, her bracelets jingling. Thomas, she started, but he silenced her with one look. I stared at the man who taught me how to ride a bike, the man whose voice had once been the sound of safety. "You always said family takes care of its own." His reply was cold final. "Until family becomes the problem." I don't remember leaving the table. I remember the sound of my chair scraping against the polished floor, the smell of rosemary and butter turning sour in my throat, and the way Dylan's laugh followed me down the hall like smoke. Outside, the rain had turned into a downpour. I stood under the porch light, trembling not from the cold, but from the realization that I'd been erased from their world. I wasn't Natalie Caldwell, daughter of the great Thomas Caldwell. I was just Natalie, unfunded, unemployed, and uninvited. That night I drove back to my tiny apartment in Tacoma. My reflection in the rearview mirror didn't look like failure. It looked like someone on the edge of something sharp and necessary. I spent hours pacing, replaying every word. We're not your bank anymore. It wasn't just rejection, it was liberation disguised as cruelty. Maybe he was right. Maybe I needed to stop asking permission. I sat down at my old desk, the one I'd bought secondhand off Craigslist, and opened my laptop. The screen flickered to life, the glow soft but defiant. I opened a blank document and typed 2 words, Project Lumos. I didn't know it yet, but that name would become a weapon, a shield, and eventually my legacy. Still in that moment, all I had was fury. The kind that burns slow and clean. The next morning I woke up before sunrise, something I hadn't done in years. The air smelled of rain and resolve. I brewed a cheap cup of coffee, pulled my hair into a messy bun, and began writing the framework for what would become Lumos's first prototype, an AI that used data transparency to empower small businesses. Every line of code was an act of rebellion. Every problem solved was a word I didn't need to say to him. Duan root gone. There were nights I cried quietly into my pillow, not because I missed my family, but because I missed the version of myself that used to need them. I sold furniture, canceled subscriptions, and lived on pure determination. One evening I received a text from Mom. Your father didn't mean to be harsh. He just wants what's best for you. I stared at the screen, thumb hovering over the keyboard. Then I typed back, what's best for me is to not live under his roof anymore. She never replied. That same week I got a rejection email from the only investor who'd agreed to meet me. Too idealistic, it said. AI can't fix fairness. I remember laughing out loud. Maybe not fairness, but it could expose hypocrisy. By the end of that year, Lumos was more than a folder on my desktop. It was my new heartbeat. And yet every time I looked out my window at the city lights, I could still hear his voice echoing, "We're not your bank anymore." It haunted me. It fueled me. It reminded me that no one was coming to save me, so I might as well save myself. Then one night, as I was debugging the system around midnight, my phone buzzed with a news alert. Caldwell Innovations partners with Novatech for a proprietary AI project. I stared at the screen, pulse quickening. The features they described, data ethics, transparency, user fairness, were mine. My designs. Dylan's name was in the press release as Chief Operations Officer and Lead Strategist. I laughed not bitterly, but with a strange calm. So they're stealing my ideas now. Perfect. That was the night I stopped building Lumos just to prove myself. I started building it to win. To create something they couldn't buy, couldn't control, couldn't bury. When I finally turned off my laptop at 3 a.m, the room was pitch black. But inside I felt the faintest spark. If family had disowned me, the world would be my inheritance. And one day when they least expected it, that same dinner table would tremble again, but this time because of my name. The first time Eli and I rented office space, it wasn't really an office. It was a converted storage room above a laundromat that smelled faintly of detergent and stale coffee. The walls were cracked. The Wi-Fi dropped every hour, and the radiator made a sound like a dying animal whenever it turned on. But it was ours. We had 1 desk, 2 laptops, and a dream too big for the room we were sitting in. Eli spread blueprints across the table, muttering to himself. If we integrate blockchain nodes into the transparency layer, Lumos could become unhackable. I grinned. You sound like a sci-fi villain. He shrugged. Villains get things done. For months, that little room became the heartbeat of my life. We worked 16-hour days surviving on instant ramen and stubborn hope. Every time my phone buzzed, I half expected it to be my father, some message telling me I'd failed, that I should come crawling back. It never came. The silence was worse. To raise money, I sold my car and half my clothes. Eli freelanced on side projects. We pitched Lumos to investors who smiled politely, asked if we had male leadership, and then disappeared. One night, after another rejection email, I slammed my laptop shut. Do you ever get tired of being underestimated? Eli leaned back, sipping cheap black coffee. Every day. But it's also the best camouflage. They don't expect us to win. I thought about that long after he left. The next morning, I stopped trying to sound like everyone else. I rebuilt our pitch deck not for approval, but for clarity. Lumos wasn't just AI, it was accountability. By summer, a small accelerator in Portland finally took notice. They gave us seed funding, $50,000, a shared workspace, and a chance. I remember signing the contract with shaking hands, whispering to myself, "We're real now." Eli laughed when I said it. We were real the second you wrote the first line of code. Still, the accelerator came with its own kind of pressure. We shared the floor with other startups, loud, hungry, confident teams led by men in tailored hoodies and venture capital smiles. They looked at me like I was lost. One of them, a guy named Trent, smirked when he passed our cubicle. "So you're the ethical AI girl, cute angle. Let me know when you build something that makes money." I smiled tightly. "I'll let you know when ethics start selling." He laughed as if that was impossible. By fall, Lumos began to gain traction. Small businesses started using our beta version to analyze their data practices. We weren't rich, but we were stable, and stability felt like power. One morning, I opened my email and froze. From Forbes Tech Desk, subject interview request. Women in AI Innovation. Forbes. It wasn't a feature, just a short Q&A, but still. My hands shook as I typed my reply. When the article came out 2 weeks later, I almost didn't believe what I was reading. Natalie Rivera, co-founder of Lumos AI, is redefining what transparency means in the tech world. Rivera. My mother's maiden name. I'd started using it quietly, legally. The Caldwell name opened doors, but it also chained me to his reputation. The night the article went live, Eli and I celebrated with takeout sushi. "You realize this is just the beginning, right?" he said. I smiled, though part of me felt hollow. "I know. But beginnings still scare me." He looked at me for a long moment. "Then let's make sure the next chapter's worth the fear." We worked through the holidays, coding late into the night. Lumos's metrics grew faster than expected, hundreds of new sign-ups, glowing reviews, and even a few calls from early investors. But with every success came new shadows. One morning, I woke up to an email that made my stomach drop. From legal@caldwellinnovations.com. Subject: trademark inquiry. Similar IP detected. I scrolled through the attached document. They were accusing me of stealing my own ideas, the same ethical transparency model I developed years ago under my father's company. Eli looked up from his laptop. "They're trying to scare you." "It's working," I said quietly. He shook his head. "No. You don't fight fear by hiding. You fight it by proving you've already won." We spent the next 72 hours compiling code logs, timestamps, prototypes, every piece of proof that Lumos had been built from scratch. When I finally sent our response to their lawyers, my hands trembled, but my voice didn't. A week later, their legal team went silent. No follow-up, no reply. Just nothing. That silence felt better than any victory. The first major investor came soon after. Her name was Priya Desai, a former Google executive turned angel investor, known for backing women-led tech. She sat across from us in a small cafe, listening as I pitched. When I finished, she smiled. "You don't need my money as much as you need the right kind of visibility. You're solving a problem no one wants to admit exists." "So you'll invest?" I asked. She nodded. "On one condition. Don't water it down to please people like your father." I froze. "You know who he is?" She smiled faintly. "Everyone in tech does. But this isn't his legacy anymore. It's yours." When she left, Eli grinned. "Well, boss, looks like we just got our first believer." Boss. The word felt strange, heavy, and right. By spring, Lumos raised $2 million in Series A funding. We moved into a real office, a renovated loft with sunlight streaming through wide windows. The first thing I did was hang a whiteboard on the wall with a single phrase written across it: "Truth is profitable." Investors started calling. Reporters followed. Every time my name appeared in an article, I braced myself for my father's reaction. None came. Until one evening. Eli and I were reviewing our product roadmap when my phone buzzed. It was a number I hadn't seen in years. Dad. I didn't answer. I just watched the phone vibrate, his name glowing against the screen. For the first time, I realized I didn't owe him my silence or my success. Eli glanced at me. "You okay?" I smiled, closing the laptop. "I'm more than okay. I'm busy building what he said I never could." Outside, the city glimmered against the night sky, electric, alive, unstoppable. And for the first time in my life, so was I. The letter arrived on a Wednesday, tucked between a stack of business contracts and an invitation to a tech summit in San Francisco. At first, I thought it was another partnership proposal. Then I saw the handwriting, elegant, looping, familiar. My mother's. I froze. The envelope was cream-colored, sealed with gold wax, stamped with the Caldwell crest. That crest used to mean home. Now it just looked like a warning. I didn't open it right away. I placed it on the corner of my desk beside the Lumos logo framed in glass and stared at it while the city outside hummed beneath the morning rain. By noon, curiosity won. Inside was a single handwritten card. "Family dinner this Friday. Your father and Vivian and I would love to see you. Dylan and his fiancée will be there. Please come home." Home. The word stung more than I expected. 5 years. That's how long it had been since I'd walked out of that house. Since Dad told me I wasn't worth the space I took at his table. Since he said he wasn't at my bank anymore. Now suddenly they wanted me back for dinner. I sat in silence for a long time, staring at those words until they blurred. Then I laughed under my breath. "Of course," I whispered. "Now that Forbes calls me a CEO, suddenly I'm worth feeding." Eli walked in holding 2 coffees. "You okay? You look like you've seen a ghost." "Worse," I said, handing him the card. He read it, whistled softly. "Wow, that's bold. After what they did, I know." He studied me. "You're not thinking of going, are you?" I hesitated. "I don't know. Part of me wants to throw this in the trash. But another part of me—" I trailed off, unsure how to finish. "Want to show them?" he asked quietly. I met his eyes. "No. I want to see them. I want to see what losing control looks like." He didn't say anything for a while. Then he nodded. "If you go as Natalie Rivera, not as their daughter." That night I sat in bed, scrolling through old photos on my phone, Christmas mornings, family trips, birthdays, where my smile didn't quite reach my eyes. I stopped at one, my father, Dylan, and me, in front of Caldwell's headquarters. I was 25, holding the project report that would later get me fired. Dad's hand rested on my shoulder in the photo. I could still hear his voice that day. "Don't let your emotions get in the way of business." I'd built an empire out of that sentence. When Friday came, I didn't tell anyone except Eli. He texted that morning, "Remember, they're not the ones feeding you anymore." I smiled at the screen. Then I dressed carefully, a simple black dress, no jewelry except a small gold pendant my mother had given me years ago. I didn't need to look rich. I just needed to look untouchable. The Caldwell mansion sat high above Bellevue, its long driveway lined with maple trees, now stripped bare by winter. When the gates opened automatically, I almost turned around. But the car kept moving, slow and steady. Maria, the housekeeper, met me at the door. She looked older, her hair streaked with gray, but her eyes softened when she saw me. "Miss Natalie," she whispered, emotion trembling in her voice. "You came." "Of course," I said, managing a smile. "You still make the best coffee in Washington?" She chuckled quietly. "Always." Then her expression shifted. "Be kind, but not too kind." "Yes," I nodded. "You always knew." The house smelled the same: roasted apples, cinnamon, expensive furniture polish. Every step across the polished stone floor echoed memories I didn't ask for. They were waiting in the dining room. Mom stood first, surprise flickering across her face before she composed it into a soft smile. "Natalie, darling, you look beautiful." "Thanks, Mom." Dad rose slowly, adjusting his cufflinks like a man preparing for a negotiation. "You look successful," he said. "Occupational hazard," I replied lightly. Dylan smirked from his seat, his fiancée, a tall brunette with diamond earrings, watching me like I was an exotic animal. "Well, if it isn't the prodigal CEO." "Careful," I said, taking my seat. I bite. The laughter that followed was too rehearsed to be real. Dinner began with polite conversation. Mom asked about Lumos. Dad commented on market volatility. Dylan bragged about his recent promotion at Caldwell Innovations. So Dad said, finally slicing into his steak, "You're really doing this AI thing on your own." Impressive, though I can't imagine it's sustainable. "Why not?" I asked. He smiled thinly. "Because good intentions don't pay dividends. Business is about control." I set my fork down. "Maybe that's why your company's stock has dropped 15% this quarter." The room went still. Dylan's jaw tightened. Mom's smile froze. Dad's voice lowered. "You still like to test boundaries, I see. Only the ones that deserve testing." He tilted his head, studying me like I was a stock he couldn't predict. "You've changed." "Not really," I said. "You just stopped looking." For a moment, no one spoke. The only sound was the faint clinking of silverware and the fireplace crackling in the corner. Then Mom exhaled softly. "Let's not turn dinner into a debate. It's Christmas soon. We're just happy you're here." Her tone was gentle pleading, the kind she used to use when trying to keep the peace between us. I smiled faintly. "I'm happy to be here too. For now." As the meal went on, small talk filled the gaps. But underneath it all was a current, unspoken electric. I could feel my father measuring me, trying to find the cracks. He wouldn't. When dessert arrived, Mom's baked apple pie, the same recipe she'd made every Christmas, I almost laughed. Some traditions never die, even when love does. Then, just as Mom was pouring wine, my phone buzzed. I almost ignored it, but something made me glance down. From Forbes' tech desk. "Congratulations. You've been selected for our Youngest CEOs in America feature. Estimated net worth $20 billion. Please confirm for publication." The room was silent, but somehow they felt the shift. Dad looked up. "Something wrong?" I slid the phone face down on the table, my pulse steady. "Not at all." Mom tilted her head. "You're smiling." "Just business," I said softly. "Always business." I caught Maria watching from the doorway, her expression knowing. For the first time that evening, I felt completely calm. They thought this dinner was a test of forgiveness, but they didn't realize this was the prelude to their education. And class was about to begin. The air in the dining room felt heavy, saturated with unspoken tension. The grand chandelier above the dining table looked heavy, casting light that felt intense and surgical over the polished silver. It didn't feel like ambiance. It felt like an interrogation spotlight. Every inch of the room screamed wealth-polished, silver-folded linen crystal glasses. I used to think it was beautiful. Now it looked fragile, like glass waiting to shatter. Dad raised his glass. "To family," he said, his voice rich and steady, the same one he used to command boardrooms. "To legacy." Mom smiled, soft and tight. Dylan echoed him with a toast of his own. "To keep the Caldwell name on top." Their glasses clinked. I didn't raise mine. I just stared at the flicker of the candles and said quietly, "And to those who learn to stand without it." The pause was sharp enough to cut. Dylan's fiancée Lila blinked as if unsure she'd heard correctly. Dad lowered his glass. "Careful, Natalie. That sounds like resentment." I smiled. "You'd recognize it if it were." A small laugh from Dylan. "You've gotten bolder. Or just less afraid." He leaned forward, elbows on the table. Funny coming from someone who used to hide behind Dad's name. I looked him dead in the eye. "And now it's the one thing slowing you down." The tension thickened, almost tangible. Mom cleared her throat. "Let's not ruin dinner. It's Christmas soon. We should be grateful we're together." Together, I repeated softly. That's a generous word for people who only gather when Forbes sends a reporter. Her smile faltered, but she didn't answer. Dad shifted in his chair, voice cool but brittle. You're still angry. I'm not angry, I said. I'm just done pretending I owe anyone silence. He tilted his head, studying me like I was a stock he couldn't predict. You think success erases history? I think it rewrites it. For a moment he said nothing. Then he smiled, that corporate hollow kind of smile. Let me guess. You've built something you believe will change the world, until it collapses under idealism. You mean like Caldwell Innovations? I asked. Dylan's fork hit his plate with a sharp clang. You've been reading reports, haven't you? I always read about failing family businesses. It's a hobby. Mom exhaled, voice thin. Natalie, please. But I couldn't stop now. Years of humiliation, dismissal, betrayal. They were all here, sitting neatly folded beside the napkins. You fired me, I said, looking straight at my father. You told me I wasn't management material. You said failure builds character. You were right. It built mine. He didn't flinch, but his jaw tightened. You're still the same child who can't take criticism. I took it, I said. I just turned it into a company worth $20 billion. The silence that followed was thick and alive. Somewhere outside, wind pressed against the windows, rattling the glass. Mom's hand froze mid-air. The wine glass tilted. Then crash. She hadn't been able to hold it. Red wine, thick and dark, spilled across the pristine white tablecloth, spreading out like a wound that instantly stained the silk. No one moved. Dad's face was drained of color. Dylan's mouth hung open. I folded my napkin neatly. You were saying something about idealism collapsing. The chandelier light caught the edge of my smile. Dad's voice came low, uneven. This is absurd. It's public, I said. Go ahead, check the Forbes homepage. Dylan fumbled for his phone. His fiancée leaned over his shoulder, gasping. Oh my God, she whispered. She's not kidding. Dad stood up his chair, scraping the floor. You did this to embarrass me. No, I said softly. You did that when you called me a burden. I just learned how to turn humiliation into equity. Mom rose slowly, eyes glassy. Natalie, sweetheart, please. Don't, I interrupted. You watched him tear me apart. You called it discipline. You told me one day I'd thank him. Tears welled in her eyes. And now you're proving him wrong. No, I said. I'm proving he never had the right to be the judge. Dad slammed his fist on the table. You think this money makes you powerful? It makes you a target. It makes you arrogant. It makes me free, I said simply. The words hung there heavier than anything else in the room. Dylan finally spoke, his voice small. How did you even? I built what you dismissed, I said. The ethical AI you called naive. The same idea you stole and branded as innovation. I took it, refined it, and made it what the world actually needs. The timing was perfect. The market was hungry for genuine accountability, and Lumos delivered it. For a moment, no one spoke. Then Dad sank back into his chair, staring at the tablecloth stained with red wine. You're just like me, he said bitterly. You think you're not, but you are. You wanted control all along. I shook my head. No, Dad. I wanted peace. You never knew the difference. Mom was crying openly now, dabbing at her eyes with a napkin. I stood, picking up my coat. Dinner's been lovely, I said quietly. But I think we've had enough toasts for one lifetime. As I turned to leave, Dad's voice followed me, hoarse, trembling, stripped of command. You walk out now. You don't come back. I paused in the doorway, glancing back just once. You said that before, I replied. And it was the best thing you ever did for me. The door clicked shut behind me. Outside, the air was cold and clean. I could still hear the faint hum of shock inside that house, the echo of everything they'd never believed I could become. The night sky over Bellevue shimmered with city lights, reflections of something vast and untouchable. I smiled to myself. For the first time, I realized revenge didn't have to look like destruction. Sometimes it looked like walking away untouched, while everything behind you burned gold. I didn't remember driving home. My hands moved on instinct, the city lights blurring through the windshield like streaks of white fire. By the time I parked outside my apartment, my chest still buzzed with adrenaline. The echo of Dad's voice, hoarse, disbelieving, rattled inside my skull. "You think money makes you powerful?" Maybe it didn't, but silence had. I walked inside, kicked off my heels, and collapsed onto the couch. My phone kept buzzing texts from Eli, from my assistant, from numbers I didn't recognize. The story was already spreading. Youngest self-made female CEO in America. $20 billion valuation. Tech's quiet disruptor. The headlines didn't feel real. They didn't feel like me. They felt like armor someone else had built and left on my doorstep. Then Eli's name flashed on the screen. I answered. "You did it," he said without preamble. "It's everywhere. CNBC, Bloomberg, even the Wall Street Journal. You're trending, Nat. The world finally sees you." "Yeah," I said softly, staring out at the city. "They see me." He hesitated. "What happened at dinner?" I laughed, a small hollow sound. "Exactly what you'd expect. Shock. Denial. Mom cried. Dad yelled. Dylan broke his glass. Merry Christmas." Eli sighed. "I hope it was worth it. It was necessary." For a moment, neither of us spoke. The quiet hummed through the phone line, thick with understanding. Finally, he said, "Get some rest. Tomorrow's going to be chaotic." He was right. The next morning, my inbox looked like an avalanche: reporters, investors, conference invitations, talk show requests. My assistant Clara had left 7 voicemails. I barely had time to sip my coffee before she burst through the office door. "Okay," she said breathlessly. "Your life officially changed overnight." I smiled faintly. "That's what they all say." "No, really," she insisted, flipping open her tablet. "You're number 2 on Forbes' trending list. The valuation for Lumos jumped 6% overnight." And she looked up, eyes wide. Thomas Caldwell issued a statement. My heartbeat quickened. "What kind of statement?" she scrolled. "Caldwell Innovations congratulates Ms. Rivera on her success and contributions to the tech industry." That's it. That's it. I sat back. The words looked polite, harmless, except I could hear the ice behind them. The same tone he'd used in boardrooms to dismiss competitors before buying them out. "He's planning something," I said quietly. "That polite statement is armor. He never congratulates without strategy." Clara frowned. "You think he'd—" "I know him," I interrupted. "He never congratulates without strategy." That evening the proof arrived. A message popped up from an unknown address. "Rumor has it Caldwell Innovations is filing for a new AI patent under your original model. You might want to check the registry." I clicked the link. There it was, my old transparency prototype, the one they'd buried when they fired me. Filed again under revised intellectual framework. Applicant Caldwell Innovations Chief Technical Officer, Dylan Caldwell. I laughed, sharp and bitter. Of course. Eli called minutes later. "You saw it," I saw it, I said. "They're trying to reclaim my work." He swore under his breath. "We'll fight it. You've got timestamps, logs, full development records." "I know," I said. "But they're not after the patent. They're after me." That night I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw my father's face across the table, the way his confidence cracked for the first time. He wouldn't let it stay that way. By dawn, I was already drafting a countermove. If he wanted a war of ownership, I'd give him one, but not the way he expected. At 8, I called my legal team. "File for full transparency rights under Lumos's ethical framework," I said, "and leak it to the press. They'll eat it up." By noon, headlines appeared: Caldwell Innovations faces patent dispute with billionaire tech founder Natalie Rivera. Eli walked into my office holding 2 coffees and an amused grin. "You really don't waste time." "Neither does he," I said. "He taught me that." The next 48 hours were a blur of calls, statements, and interviews. Every news anchor wanted a soundbite. Every investor wanted assurance that Lumos was stable. But beneath the noise, something quieter began to happen. Messages poured in from women I'd never met, engineers, entrepreneurs, students. "You're the reason I didn't quit." My boss told me I wasn't management material either. Thank you for proving him wrong. Reading them felt like breathing clean air after years underground. For the first time, my story wasn't just mine. It was a mirror for thousands of others. That night, standing by my window, overlooking downtown Seattle, I realized what revenge had turned into. It wasn't about payback anymore. It was about proof. Then, as if the universe wanted to test my resolve, my phone buzzed again. Unknown number. I hesitated, then answered. "Hello, is this Natalie Rivera?" A man's voice, formal, deliberate. "Yeah. This is Harold Kent, chairman of the Caldwell Innovations Board. We'd like to meet." I laughed softly. "Let me guess. Damage control." "You misunderstand," he said. "Thomas is struggling. The company's shareholders are losing confidence. Some believe a partnership with Lumos could—" "No," I interrupted. "You had your chance. This isn't about him," Kent said. "It's about the people who'll lose their jobs if Caldwell Innovations collapses." That silenced me. For a moment, I saw Maria, the housekeeper, the security guard who used to sneak me snacks during late-night work sessions, the assistants who'd smiled nervously when I got fired, the people who'd been invisible like I once was. "I'll think about it," I said finally, and hung up. When I told Eli, he frowned. "You can't save everyone, Nat." "I know," I said, "but maybe I can save what's worth saving." Outside, the city lights shimmered like circuitry. My reflection in the glass looked different, older, sharper, untouchable, but still searching. This wasn't the ending I'd imagined, but maybe, just maybe, it was the beginning of something better. Tomorrow I'd face the man who'd once told me I was nothing. This time, I'd be the one holding the future in my hands. The conference room at the Grand Meridian Hotel smelled like power and polished ambition, fresh coffee, leather chairs, and the faint trace of nerves that money never really hides. Caldwell Innovations' logo gleamed on the wall opposite the panoramic view of Seattle's skyline. I'd sat under that logo once as an employee. Today I faced it as their competition. Thomas Caldwell was already there when I arrived. He didn't stand, didn't smile, just adjusted his cufflinks and said, "You came." "I'm here for the meeting," I said. "Not for you." Across the table sat Harold Kent, the board chairman, and 3 executives whose names I didn't bother remembering. Next to me, Eli unfolded his laptop and gave a polite nod. Kent started with a practiced tone. "Ms. Rivera, Mr. Turner, thank you for coming. Caldwell Innovations is in transition. The board believes collaboration could be mutually beneficial." "Collaboration," I repeated. "That's a generous word for desperation." Thomas's jaw tightened, but he didn't interrupt. Kent cleared his throat. "To be direct, we'd like to acquire Lumos. You'd retain full creative control, of course, and we'd provide infrastructure funding and market access. Together, we could revolutionize the AI landscape." I leaned back in my chair, crossing my arms. "And what would you call that revolution exactly? The one where you buy out the daughter you disowned?" Silence. Eli glanced at me, expression unreadable. Kent hesitated. "Ms. Rivera, this isn't personal." "It's entirely personal," I said. "And you all know it." Dad finally spoke, voice low and deliberate. "This is business. You built something impressive, Natalie, but the market is shifting. If you want to survive long-term, you need a partner who understands scale." "You mean a partner who knows how to take credit," I said. He ignored that. "We're offering $2 billion in equity and shared leadership. It's more than fair." I laughed softly. $2 billion for a $20 billion company. That's not an offer. That's an attempt to buy back control of a rocket ship with pocket change. One of the executives coughed. Another glanced nervously at Thomas, who was struggling to hold his composure. Eli slid a folder across the table. "For context," he said smoothly, "Lumos's Q4 projections exceed $10 billion in new contracts. If we merged, Caldwell Innovations would actually drag us down." Kent frowned. "You don't have to be adversarial, Mr. Turner." "I'm not," Eli said. "I'm being factual." I looked directly at my father. You taught me that numbers don't lie. They just expose. For a moment, something flickered behind his eyes. Recognition, maybe even respect, but it vanished quickly. You're enjoying this, aren't you? He said. Enjoying it, I said quietly. No, but I'm not apologizing for surviving. The room went still again. Outside the glass walls, the city glimmered under a gray morning sky. I could almost hear the hum of traffic below the rhythm of people moving forward while we sat here stuck in the past. Dad straightened. The offer stands. But if you turn it down, you'll make an enemy out of Caldwell Innovations. You already did that years ago, I said. Kent shifted uncomfortably. Perhaps we should. No, Dad said sharply, cutting him off. She wants honesty? Fine. You're talented, Natalie, but you're reckless. You don't understand politics. The moment you fall out of favor with investors, you'll be finished. And when that happens, no one will save you. I stood. You're right, no one will. And that's exactly why I'll win. Eli rose beside me, gathering his laptop. The meeting's over, he said. But as we turned to leave, Dad's voice stopped me. Natalie! I paused, hand on the door. He looked older suddenly, the lines around his eyes deeper than I remembered. You really think you can do this alone? I met his gaze. I already have. And then I walked out. Outside the boardroom, the corridor felt colder. Eli fell into step beside me. That was intense. Expected, I said. He's not going to take this quietly. I'm counting on it. By the time we reached the elevator, my phone was buzzing again, calls, emails, news alerts. Word was spreading fast. Caldwell Innovations had tried to buy Lumos. Lumos had said no. The market reacted instantly. Caldwell's shares slipped another 5% by evening. Ours climbed 3%. Later that night, as I sat in my apartment with a glass of wine, my phone buzzed again. This time it wasn't a journalist or investor. It was Mom. Her message was short. He's not well. He won't say it, but he's shaken. Please, just be careful. I stared at the words until the screen dimmed. Then I called Eli. Tomorrow, I said, we launch the Open Data Initiative. Full transparency mode. He hesitated. You sure that'll expose every corporate model we've partnered with, including I know? That's the point. Nat, that's nuclear. I took a slow breath. Good. It's time someone saw what real ethics look like. The next day, the world changed again. Lumos went live with its new public transparency platform, an open access model showing how every major tech company handled data privacy and algorithmic bias. The internet exploded. Users flooded social media with shock, outrage, admiration. Caldwell. Innovations numbers were among the worst. By sunset, regulators were calling for audits. News anchors debated whether Lumos had just sparked the biggest tech reckoning of the decade. Eli sat across from me in our office, scrolling through the chaos. You realize this is going to destroy them. I watched the headlines scroll across the monitors. Lumos shines light on corporate corruption. Caldwell AI ethics under fire. I whispered almost to myself, no. I'm not destroying them. I'm just holding up the mirror. And for the first time in years, I felt the smallest flicker of peace. It wasn't vengeance. It was vindication. But somewhere deep inside, a quieter voice whispered something I didn't want to admit. This wasn't over. It was only the beginning of their fall. And maybe mine too. The headlines were still burning when I walked into the Lumos headquarters the next morning. Every screen in the lobby was flashing versions of my name. Natalie Rivera exposes the industry. Lumos breaks the silence. The CEO who dared to tell the truth. Employees looked up from their desks as I passed, some smiling, others anxious. The company was alive with adrenaline and uncertainty, the air thick with the hum of something irreversible. Clara ran up, tablet in hand, face pale. We've had over 3 million downloads of the transparency dashboard in 12 hours. Half the Fortune 500 just froze their AI operations. Caldwell's stock is down 30% since the market opened. I stopped walking. 30? She nodded. And it's not just them. Regulators are already circling. The SEC wants statements. The Department of Commerce called twice. Behind her, Eli appeared from the elevator, his tie loose and his expression grim. "You've created a movement," he said. "Now everyone wants to know who the villain is." "Let them decide," I said. "They already have. Caldwell's board is panicking. Thomas is blaming you publicly." He handed me his phone. On the screen was a live clip from a news broadcast. My father stood behind a podium flanked by reporters, his voice calm but edged with fury. "Miss Rivera's actions are reckless and misleading," he said. "She's weaponized data to attack former colleagues and destabilize trust in technology itself. I built Caldwell Innovations to push humanity forward, not tear it apart." I handed the phone back. "He's spinning it like a patriot speech." "Classic." Eli crossed his arms. "And it's working. Public sentiment's split. Some think you're a hero. Others think you're a cyber anarchist." I smiled faintly. "Good. They're supposed to argue." But inside I felt something heavier. The kind of exhaustion that comes after winning a battle you didn't actually want to fight. By noon the chaos had tripled. The Lumos server crashed twice under traffic spikes. Investors demanded emergency meetings. Journalists camped outside our headquarters. I managed to steal 10 minutes alone in my office. The skyline outside glowed cold and sharp through the window, and for the first time in years, I wished I could call my mother without it being about damage control. The thought barely formed before my phone buzzed and her name appeared on the screen. I froze for a second, then answered, "Mom." Her voice trembled. "You need to stop this, Natalie." "Stop what?" "The truth. This isn't true anymore, it's war. Do you know what you're doing to your father?" I let out a long breath. "Do you know what he did to me?" "That was business," she said weakly. "He thought he was protecting you from disappointment. By firing me in front of a boardroom full of men," I said. "By erasing my work and calling it incompetence." There was a long silence. Then she whispered, "He's breaking Natalie. He won't say it, but I see it. Please, just talk to him before this destroys everything." "Everything's already destroyed," I said quietly. I just made sure people could see the rubble. When the call ended, I sat in silence. The city hummed beneath me, indifferent and unstoppable. Later that night, I went for a walk near the waterfront. The winter wind off the Puget Sound cut through my coat, sharp and cleansing. Streetlights reflected off the wet pavement. Eli found me there an hour later. "I knew you'd come here," he said, shoving his hands into his pockets. "Whenever you're thinking too much, you end up by the water." "It's the only place quiet enough to hear my mistakes," I said. He studied me for a long moment. "You don't regret exposing them, do you?" "No," I said truthfully. "But I regret that it had to be him." Eli nodded. "Thomas made his choices. You just refused to play his game anymore." The wind gusted harder. I looked out over the dark waves. He built his empire under control. I built mine on clarity. Maybe neither of us realized the cost. The next morning, my prediction came true. A courier delivered an official document to my office. Notice of litigation, Caldwell Innovations vs. Lumos Corporation. Eli read the header aloud. "They're suing us for corporate defamation and intellectual theft." I almost laughed. He's suing me for taking back what was already mine. But even as I said it, I felt the chill of what this meant. Lawsuits could drag on for years, bleed resources, shake investors. The war had officially gone public. That evening, my inbox flooded again, this time with messages from journalists, activists, even government officials. They wanted interviews, statements, partnerships. One email stood out. Subject line: Ethics in Tech Summit. Keynote invitation. They wanted me to speak, to tell the story, to define what truth meant in an industry built on secrecy. I stared at the message for a long time before typing a single line back, "I'll do it." When I looked up from the screen, Eli was watching me. "You're turning into a symbol," he said softly. "Symbols don't sleep," I replied. That night I dreamed of the dinner table again, the flicker of candlelight, the crash of a glass, my father's face when I said I was free. Only this time, when I looked up from the table, I wasn't sitting across from him. I was sitting in his chair. The confidence in the image was unsettling, replacing the old cold fury with a quiet, decisive power. The next day, Lumos's valuation jumped again. The markets were calling it the Rivera effect. And all I could think was how fragile even power could feel when it was built on truth. Because truth, no matter how bright, always burns someone. And this time, I wasn't sure who would catch fire first. The ballroom was silent except for the faint buzz of cameras. Spotlights cut across the stage, catching the shimmer of the Ethics in Tech Summit banner behind me. I'd stood in front of thousands of people before, investors, journalists, engineers, but never like this. Never as the person expected to defend the truth that had set an empire on fire. As I adjusted the mic, I caught my reflection on the giant screen above, composed, confident, untouchable. Inside my heart was a live wire. 5 years ago, I was told I didn't belong in the room where decisions were made. Today, that same room is asking for advice on how to rebuild. A soft murmur rippled through the crowd. Somewhere in the front row, I saw Eli nod slightly. My mother had come to, sitting 2 seats behind him, her hands folded tightly in her lap. I continued, letting my voice steady. We built technology faster than we built ethics. We valued data more than dignity. And when I tried to change that, I was told I was naive. A few cameras clicked. I paused, looking at the sea of faces staring back. Transparency isn't an act of rebellion. It's an act of responsibility. And if that threatens you, then maybe you've forgotten who you were supposed to serve. The applause came slowly, hesitant at first, then growing. I forced a smile, but my chest felt hollow. After the speech, reporters swarmed the stage. Questions flew like arrows about Lumos, about the lawsuit, about my father. Ms. Rivera, do you think Caldwell Innovations deserves to fail? No, I said, meeting their eyes. I think they deserve to evolve. Is it true your father plans to step down as CEO? That one hit like a punch. I hadn't heard that. Not yet. By the time I reached the car, my phone was already buzzing again. A message from Mom. He's in his office. He won't talk to anyone. Please, Natalie, just come. I closed my eyes, leaning back in the seat. The driver didn't ask where to go, he already knew. The Caldwell estate hadn't changed. The long driveway lined with sycamores, the old stone facade that once felt like a monument, and a cage all at once. I hadn't been here since that dinner. Inside, everything was too quiet. The staff had thinned the air, heavy with the scent of dust and time. Mom met me in the hall, her face pale but soft. He's in the study. I hesitated at the door. The last time I'd stood there, I'd been fired. This time, I was walking in as the person who'd made the world question his legacy. Dad sat behind the desk, the same mahogany one he'd once ruled from like a throne. Papers covered every inch of it. His tie was loose, his eyes red-rimmed but sharp. So he said without looking up, "The prodigal daughter returns." I took a slow breath. I didn't come to gloat. He gave a dry laugh. "You sure you've done everything else? I came because Mom asked me to." He looked up, then the weight of years and pride sitting heavy on his face. "You think I don't know what you've done? You've turned me into a villain. My company, our company is collapsing. Thousands of people will lose their jobs. Our company," I said softly. "You made sure it was never ours." He slammed a hand on the desk. "I built this from nothing, and you taught me to do the same," I said, matching his tone. "The only difference is I did it without burning anyone on the way up." He stared at me, the fury draining from his face replaced by something quieter. Shame, maybe. Or recognition. "You always saw the world in black and white," he muttered. "But it's gray, Natalie. It always has been." I shook my head. "No, you made it gray because that's where power hides. You called it business. I called it manipulation." We stood there in silence for a long moment, the years between us thick and unspoken. Finally, he leaned back in his chair, looking smaller than I'd ever seen him. "So what now? You'll watch me lose everything." "Is that the victory you wanted?" "No," I said quietly. "This isn't about victory. It's about accountability. And if you still don't understand the difference, then you've already lost." His eyes flickered to the window to the city skyline beyond. "You sound just like your mother," he said finally. "She used to believe in me too." "Maybe she still does," I said. "Just not in the way you think." He didn't answer, just stared out the window, lost somewhere between regret and pride. When I turned to leave, his voice stopped me again. "Natalie." I looked back. He hesitated, then said, "I read your interview in Forbes. You said power isn't control, it's freedom." I didn't understand it then. I think I do now. For a moment, I couldn't speak. "Then maybe there's still hope," I whispered. Outside, Mom waited at the bottom of the stairs. Her eyes searched mine. "He finally sees the storm you always were, Natalie. And you finally saw the man behind the company." She smiled faintly, tears glinting. "It's more than something. It's a start." As I walked out into the night, the cold air hit me like clarity. My father hadn't apologized, not really, but he'd looked at me like he finally saw me. And that was enough for now. The next morning, the world woke to another headline. Caldwell Innovations Board to vote on leadership restructuring. For the first time, it wasn't a fight. It had an ending. I stood by my office window watching the dawn break over the skyline. The city was waking up, and so was I. Revenge had burned itself out. What came next wasn't about payback. It was about rebuilding. And this time, I would build something that didn't need to hide behind anyone's name. The morning the vote happened, Seattle felt unnaturally still. No wind, no rain, no clouds moving across the horizon, just that heavy, suspended quiet that always comes before something breaks. From my office window, I could see the harbor lights flickering through the gray dawn. Below, a small crowd had already gathered. Journalists, camera crews, onlookers. Everyone wanted to see what happened when the old empire finally fell. Eli walked in carrying 2 coffees, his expression unreadable. "They're starting the meeting in 15 minutes, he said. I took the cup from him and nodded. And the board divided. 5 for removal, 3 against 2 undecided. It could go either way. I didn't answer. For months I had dreamed of this moment, my father facing the same scrutiny he once used to crush me. But now that it was here, all I felt was a strange, quiet detachment. Eli studied me. "You sure you don't want to be there in person?" "No," I said. "It's his board, his reckoning. I don't need to stand in the room to know how it ends." He hesitated. "And if they don't remove him," I smiled faintly, "then the market will." As the clock ticked toward 9, I turned away from the window and opened my laptop. On the screen was a draft of a new press release Lumos Foundation launches initiative to support female founders in tech. A different kind of legacy, one that had nothing to do with revenge. Eli leaned against the desk. "You really think this is what comes next for you?" "I don't think," I said. "I know." He nodded slowly, the corners of his mouth softening. "You're changing the narrative, Nat." "Good," I said, "because I'm tired of living in his." The phone rang. Clara's voice came through, hushed and tense. "The vote's over." Eli and I locked eyes, and there was a pause. Then it passed. "He's out." For a moment, the words didn't register. My heart didn't leap, my breath didn't catch. It was quieter than that. A slow, steady exhale of something I'd been holding for years. "Who replaces him?" I asked. "Interim CEO is Harold Kent," Clara said. "But there's more." The board issued a public statement thanking him for his years of service and contributions to innovation. They're calling it a graceful transition. I almost laughed. "Graceful? That's generous." Eli crossed his arms. "So that's it. It's over." I looked out the window again. "No," I said softly. "It's the start of something else." Later that afternoon, I drove to my mother's house. The gate opened automatically, though I hadn't told her I was coming. When she saw me standing at the door, she didn't speak, just wrapped her arms around me and held on like she was afraid I might disappear. Inside, the fire was burning low. Dad was sitting by the window, a cup of untouched coffee cooling beside him. The man who'd once filled boardrooms with authority now looked human, fragile. He didn't look up when I entered. "I suppose you heard." "I did," I said. "Graceful exit," he muttered bitterly. "That's what they're calling it. After 30 years, they voted me out like I was an obsolete system." I walked closer. "You taught me to adapt or get left behind." He gave a dry laugh. "So now you're giving me my own advice. Maybe." He turned, then his eyes meeting mine. There was no anger in them this time, just fatigue, and something that almost looked like relief. "You know, when I started that company, all I wanted was to build something that would last. Somewhere along the way, I stopped building and started defending. Against everyone, including you." I didn't know what to say. He looked back toward the window. "You were right about me. About all of it. The control, the manipulation, the fear. I called it strength, but it was weakness. I couldn't stand the idea that you might outgrow me." I swallowed hard. "And now," he said quietly, "I'm proud you did." The words landed like a blow and a blessing all at once. For a second, the years of anger I'd carried inside me dissolved into something softer, almost sorrowful. "I didn't want this," I said finally. "I never wanted to destroy you." He smiled faintly. "You didn't. You freed me. Even if it took everything to do it." The fire crackled between us, the silence heavy but clean. After a long while, Mom appeared in the doorway, wiping her hands on a dish towel. "You two are going to sit there staring at each other all night," she said, smiling through tears. Dad chuckled an actual quiet laugh that startled me. "She always did have your timing," he said to her. And for the first time, I laughed too. That evening after dinner, I stood outside under the porch light. The sky was a dark velvet blue, the air crisp with the smell of pine. My mother kissed my cheek before heading inside, leaving me alone with my thoughts. Dad's voice drifted through the open window. "She's her own storm, Vivian. You can't stop her. You just hope she's blowing in the right direction." The words made me smile. When I returned to my apartment later, my phone buzzed again, another email, another headline. "Caldwell Innovations under new leadership. Lumos CEO to keynote at UN Tech Ethics Forum." The world kept spinning louder and faster than ever, but for once I didn't feel the need to chase it. I poured a glass of water, sat by the window, and looked at the city below, the same city where I'd once walked out of a building in tears, convinced my life was over. Now it pulsed with light, alive with possibility. I thought of the girl I used to be, the one who thought success meant validation, the one who measured her worth by someone else's approval. She was gone. What remained was quieter, stronger. My phone buzzed one last time. A text from Eli. "We did it. He's out. The industry's already shifting because of Lumos. Proud of you, Nat." I typed back, "It's not about who's out. It's about what comes next." He replied instantly, "Then what comes next?" I looked out at the skyline. Somewhere out there, teams were coding through the night, founders were dreaming, systems were breaking and being rebuilt. Change, I texted back. Real change. And for the first time in years, I meant it. I wasn't fighting anyone anymore, not my father, not the past, not even myself. I was building. And this time, it wasn't for revenge. It was for everything that came after. The night before the UN Tech Ethics Forum, I couldn't sleep. The city outside my window shimmered like circuitry, bright, alive, restless. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the quiet hum of my apartment, thinking about everything that had brought me here. 5 years ago, I was fired by my own family. Tonight, I was preparing to stand in front of world leaders and talk about integrity and innovation. The irony wasn't lost on me. At 5 a.m, I gave up on sleep-brewed coffee and opened my notes for the speech. It wasn't polished yet. I'd written and rewritten it half a dozen times, but it never felt right. Too cold, too distant. It sounded like something my father would have said, measured, impressive, but hollow. I deleted the entire opening paragraph. Then I started over. By the time the sun rose over the Puget Sound, the words had finally found me. Honest, imperfect, humans. Eli called, just as I was slipping into my blazer. "Car's waiting downstairs," he said. I smiled faintly. "You sound nervous." "I'm not," he said, though his tone betrayed him. "You're about to speak to the people who decide how the world runs, Nat. That's not exactly small talk." "Then it's about time someone told them something real," I said. The conference hall in Geneva was all glass and polished stone, filled with the quiet murmurs of translators, delegates, and press. 1,000 faces turned as I stepped onto the stage lights glaring against the polished floor. My hands didn't shake this time. 5 years ago, I began. I sat in a meeting where I was told that failure would build character, assuming I could afford to keep learning. That was the day I realized most people in power aren't afraid of failure. They're afraid of accountability. A ripple went through the audience. I paused long enough for the silence to settle. "Technology moves faster than morality," I continued. "And somewhere along the way, we decided efficiency mattered more than empathy. I'm here to say that if innovation doesn't serve humanity, it's not progress, it's vanity." From the corner of my eye, I saw cameras flashing, pens moving, but I wasn't talking to them. I was talking to that younger version of myself, the girl sitting in a cold conference room, watching her father call her unfit for leadership. I built Lumos because I wanted to prove something I admitted. Not to investors or critics, but to myself, that power doesn't have to be corrupt. That transparency can be profitable. That integrity isn't weakness. It's the foundation of everything that lasts. The applause started slowly and then swelled, echoing through the hall like a pulse. When it faded, I closed with the line that had carried me through every sleepless night. "Forgive the people who tried to define your limits. They gave you a map of everywhere you're not supposed to stop." When I walked off stage, Eli was waiting in the wings, grinning like a proud older brother. "You just broke the internet again," he said, showing me his phone. Hashtags were already trending: Lumos Effect, ethical Natalie Rivera speech. I laughed softly. It's not about breaking the internet. It's about building what comes after it. We spent the rest of the afternoon in meetings, policy sessions, press conferences, quiet conversations with people who'd once dismissed me. The same faces that used to look past me now leaned forward, taking notes. But the moment that stayed with me came later that evening, when I walked into the networking reception and saw someone I didn't expect: Thomas Caldwell. He stood near the back of the room. No entourage, no cameras. Just a glass of sparkling water in one hand, and that familiar, unreadable expression. For a second, the air seemed to thin. He caught my eye and gave a small nod. I walked over. "Didn't expect to see you here," I said. He smiled faintly. "Neither did I. But when your daughter becomes the face of ethical reform, you tend to pay attention." I raised an eyebrow. "You flew all the way here just to watch me talk about everything you used to ignore," maybe he said. "Or maybe I came to learn something." We stood there for a moment, surrounded by the low murmur of diplomats and CEOs, pretending not to eavesdrop. "I heard the board made your resignation permanent," I said. "They did," he replied without bitterness. "Harold's running things for now. They're restructuring, just like you said they would." "And how do you feel about that?" He took a slow sip of his drink. "Lighter. Angry, yes, but lighter. I spent so long trying to be indispensable that I forgot what it feels like to be human." I nodded. "Maybe that's the only kind of innovation that really matters, remembering who we are." He chuckled quietly. "You sound like your mother." "Good," I said. "She's the only one who ever knew how to survive you." For the first time, he smiled, a real one, tired but genuine. "You were always stronger than I wanted to admit." "Not stronger," I said softly. "Just done being afraid." He looked at me for a long moment, then said, "I'm proud of you, Natalie." The words didn't erase the years of silence, the wounds, or the humiliation, but they reached somewhere deeper. Not because I needed them, but because he finally meant them. "Thank you," I said. "But the credit goes to the girl you fired." He laughed again, this time with something like peace. "She turned out all right." We stood there until the music faded, two people who had spent years at war, finally finding a fragile kind of truce. Later on the flight back to Seattle, I looked out the window as the clouds drifted beneath the wings. My reflection stared back, older, clearer whole. Eli was asleep beside me, his laptop still open to a headline that made me smile. Lumos CEO to launch global initiative for digital equity. The world kept changing, and for once, I didn't feel like I was running to catch up. Somewhere between the quiet hum of the engines and the soft glow of dawn, I thought of everything my father used to say about control, that without it, you lose everything. But I'd lost control a long time ago. And somehow, that's when I'd finally found myself. As the sun began to rise over the Atlantic, I whispered to no one in particular, here's to the next version. Not of the company, of me. Seattle was glowing the night I came home. The rain had finally stopped, leaving the streets slick and luminous under the amber streetlights. From my penthouse window, the skyline stretched endlessly, a network of glass and steel pulsing like a living organism. Somewhere inside that city, a younger version of me had once walked out of an office with shaking hands, a cardboard box full of dreams, and no idea who she was without her family's name. Now I stood in the same city, no box, no fear, just quiet. The next morning I walked into the Lumos headquarters earlier than usual. The office was still half asleep, screens dark, coffee machines hissing in the background. I loved it that way before the world woke up to ask for more. On the wall near the lobby, a new sign had been installed overnight, Lumos Foundation powering equity through innovation. Zoe, the young director we'd hired months ago, appeared from the conference room with a folder pressed to her chest. Her hair was pulled back, her eyes bright with the kind of fire that used to live in mine. They're ready, she said. In the main boardroom, a group of new founders waited, women veterans, single parents, kids barely out of college. Each had been chosen to receive our first round of startup grants. They looked nervous, hopeful, defiant. I smiled as I spoke. 5 years ago, I was sitting where you are, no money, no connections, just a belief that what I had to build mattered. And someone told me I was dreaming too big. So let me start by saying, keep dreaming too big. Laughter rippled through the room. The tension broke. For the next hour, we talked about business models, digital ethics, and human-centered design. But underneath the data and strategy, there was something deeper threading through it all, a shared understanding that we were rewriting the rules together. When the session ended, Zoe lingered behind. You know, she said they look at you like you're untouchable. I laughed softly. Then they're not looking close enough. I'm just further down the same road. She smiled. Still, it's a hell of a road. After she left, I sat alone at the long conference table. Outside the glass walls, the city buzzed to life. For years, I'd chased revenge like oxygen, thinking that power would heal what betrayal broke. But revenge was just a doorway. What came after was the real work, building something better from the ashes. That afternoon, I visited my parents. The Caldwell house was quieter than I remembered, stripped of its grandeur. No servants rushing, no loud phone calls echoing through the halls. Just my mother humming softly somewhere in the kitchen. She greeted me with that same familiar warmth. You're early, she said, handing me a mug of coffee. Jet lag, I replied, smiling. Geneva feels like a dream now. She touched my cheek. Your father watched the whole speech live. I raised an eyebrow. Did he comment on it? He didn't have to, she said gently. He just sat there listening. When it ended, he said, she finally learned to lead without me. The words caught me off guard, both painful and liberating. Dad appeared a few moments later, slower than before, wearing an old sweater I hadn't seen in years. The proud stiffness was gone. He looked ordinary, and somehow that made him human again. I heard you're turning half your profits into community funding, he said. That's the plan, I said. We're calling it Lumos Local. Small investments, big reach. He nodded slowly. It's smart, sustainable. Then with a wry smile, he added, something I never quite mastered. You mastered other things, I said quietly, just not the ones that mattered most. He took the seat across from me. You were right to walk away. You were right about everything. The old me would have basked in that. But now it just felt like closure. We both did what we had to, I said. He studied me for a long moment. You know, he said, finally people keep calling you the youngest self-made CEO in the country. But you didn't build this alone. You built it with every person you refused to become. That made me smile. You're quoting philosophy now. He chuckled. Age does strange things to a man. We spent the afternoon talking not about business or legacy, but about life. About my grandmother who'd left him her favorite fountain pen when he was 16. About how Mom used to sneak him pie after late-night meetings when they were newlyweds. About mistakes that didn't sound like confessions anymore, just lessons written in hindsight. When I left, he walked me to the door. You've done good, kid, he said. Trying to, I replied. The sun was setting as I drove away, the light spilling over the water like molten gold. For the first time, I didn't feel like I was running from that house. I was simply leaving it behind. That night back in my apartment, I found a handwritten note slipped under the door. No envelope, no signature, just familiar, precise handwriting. For every time I told you to stay small, thank you for proving me wrong. You didn't inherit my empire, Natalie. You built your own. I folded it carefully, set it on my desk, and let the silence fill the room. In the following weeks, Lumos expanded faster than anyone predicted. Partnerships flourished. Universities reached out. Our transparency model became a global standard. Every news outlet had a headline for it, but my favorite came from Forbes, the girl who was told we're not your bank anymore, just redefined the future of finance. I didn't frame it. I didn't need to, because the real victory wasn't in the valuation or the applause. It was in the quiet moments, the ones where I caught my reflection and didn't see the girl trying to prove herself anymore, just a woman who had. One evening while reviewing grant proposals, Zoe asked, "What's next for you?" I looked out the window, watching the city glow against the night. Not control, I said. Not power. Just purpose. She smiled. That's rare. Then we'll make it less rare, I said. The rain began again, soft, rhythmic, familiar. I let it play like a lullaby against the glass as I shut down my laptop. The past had finally gone quiet. I picked up my phone, opened Lumos's social page, and began typing my final post for the night. When someone tells you they're not your bank anymore, thank them. They just stopped funding your limitations. Build anyway. Then, after a long breath, I added, and if this story meant something to you, share it. Because somewhere out there, someone's still waiting for permission to rise. I hit post. Outside,